Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you for joining me for this session of CICD Summer School. This is actually the seventh session, but it's labeled as 6 because we started counting from 0. I'm your host, Michael Jenkins. Thanks so much for joining me. Wow, it's been a wild ride, right? For the past what is it now? I guess 7 weeks. We've been chopping up this information and connecting over some CI/CD topics, and we've come to the end. This is the final exam, the last session of CI/CD Summer School. But we're gonna have fun. We're gonna have a good time. It's gonna be light and easy. Um, no homework for this session. If you've been joining us for previous sessions, you know that at the end of every session, we have some homework that we have to go over to kind of cement the information that we discussed and enhance our skills a little bit. But this time, we're going to do a review. We're going to take a final exam, indeed, but no homework. We get an opportunity to chill before. I mean, maybe we take a break and then we get back to the grind, whatever our regular grind is. So, yeah, like I said, I'm your host, Michael Jenkins. I'm joining you all from Southern California, right outside of Los Angeles. And if you're joining us from wherever you are, shout out your location. I'm always amazed by folks that are joining us from uh, around the world, wherever you're joining us from. And I want to give a shout out to one of the folks that I look up to. I shouted him out in an earlier episode, Tech Coach Ralph. Thanks for joining the session today, sir. Salute to you. And yeah, he's dropping some comments in the event here saying that missed the previous episodes. Don't worry, they're on YouTube. You can go back and check them out. The information there will probably be evergreen. The meat of the conversation anyway. And yeah, indeed, it is hard to have homework. For the final exam or after the final exam. It's like, who are you going to turn it into, right? We're not going to be here. Right, no doubt. So like I say, we're gonna take it nice and easy. And during this segment, I usually ask what people have been working on this week. Well, yeah, whatever you're working on, drop it into the chat, and I'll be happy to share and shout you out for some of the work that you've done. This week in my 9 to 5, I was doing some more Python scripting, and I was processing financial data, specifically cloud costs. So it was a lot of fun working with some of the systems that I got to work with, the data store where that cost information is stored. I put together some automation to create pre-filled URLs, because when I go into that system, I have to select some things and it creates a URL with the dates and everything for the data that I'm pulling. And I put some Python together to actually create the pre-filled URL so that I can click them from my terminal. It opens my browser and takes me exactly where I want to go. Saves me about 2 minutes there, because even after I select stuff in the browser, the system has to process to generate the report. And I have to do that 3 times. So it probably saved me about 5 minutes worth of work there. And I have to do that every month. And then I put together some Python scripts to actually generate the reports that I need. So I get like the CSV dump, and I use Python to actually scrape through those dumps and produce this report that I have to share with other people. So that was a lot of fun for me. So I really, really enjoyed that. So the next segment that we always get into, I'm just so giddy right now for this being the last session. I've enjoyed hanging with y'all. I'm looking forward to taking a break, I'll be honest, but I'm also going to miss this interaction. But let's go right into our next segment, which is Around the Way. So Around the Way, and let me get rid of this welcome banner. Around the Way is a segment where I share resources that I tap into to hone my skills and keep me sharp. Podcasts, content creators, resources and tools that I use. I find them useful, and I hope you will as well. So let's get into, I only got one for this particular session. and it is softskills.audio, which is a podcast. So Dave Smith and Jameson Dance, they've been doing this podcast since 2016. They're well into the 400 count of episodes, right? And I started listening to them when I started working with my current employer, all these years ago. And my commute was a bear, right? It was just, it was a long time for me to get from A to B to get to work, right? So that's really about the time that I started to get into podcasts. And so I came across their podcast and really dialed into it. And I've been listening to them ever since from the very beginning. Excuse me. And their format is a weekly advice column for engineers and software developers, but they cover the softer side of the work that we do. So career development, working with your peers, uh, performance reviews, working with your manager, finding new jobs, delicately exiting the current job that you're in as you go to find your new job, negotiation for salary. They cover a lot of things that we need to know as professionals that we may not necessarily learn in school. Just straight up. A lot of people aren't teaching the softer side of the ways that we work. So they have experience in hiring people, leading teams, and developing software, working with large and small companies, startups, enterprises. And they lean on that experience to answer people's questions. And it's really cool. They have this Google form. You can go there, enter your question, and they pull from the questions for each episode. I have submitted a couple questions. They've given some really, really good answers. I'm not going to identify my specific questions because some of the topics are kind of like bananas, right? Or rather, it might not even be the topic or the question, but the scenario might be kind of like, whoa, you had to go through that, or you're going through that. But their information is spot on. And yeah, they've been like sharing very beneficial information for quite some time. So I highly recommend you checking out Dave and Jameson on the Soft Skills Engineering podcast. You can find them at softskills.audio. All right. Last week, this is the last week that we got to do, right? But I still want to give a shout out to the session that we had last week. Last week, we covered security in our pipelines, specifically securing the delivery and deployment pipelines. Reviewing my notes here. Yeah, the homework for this particular session was to, we talked about Google Alerts, and I showed how you can use Google Alerts to stay on top of the tools that you use. And also you can benefit from those if there's any CVEs that get published, CVE being common vulnerability and exposures. If they're related to any particular tool that you're using, you can stay up to date on those like real time as it happens, as it's being published. So that was one of the homework assignments. And I also shared two case studies that were published by Palo Alto Networks, and they covered how people, these people being threat actors, bad actors, were tapping into vulnerabilities in CI/CD pipelines. And they were actually getting to the point where they were changing artifacts, replacing artifacts with their own artifacts. They were stealing credentials, or rather, capturing credentials that allowed them to write back to repositories. And one example that they gave in that case was they created a new branch on a repository. They didn't actually add any code in their example, but they showed how they had write access to that repository simply by capturing a token that was exposed during a GitHub Actions run in a public repository. So yeah, those, like I said, they were eye-opening for me, riveting. So I, read them top to bottom very quickly. And that was also part of your homework. I hope you found those interesting. And based on our discussion, we talked about how you should think about your pipelines and any mistakes that you might be making there that people could potentially take advantage of. And definitely ways to mitigate those mistakes or remedy those mistakes so that they're not in place. You want your CI/CD pipelines to be secure, just as secure, if at all possible, as your application or software when it's actually deployed. So that's just a quick rundown of what we had last week, talking about security. I hope you found that beneficial and actually applied something to the CI/CD pipelines that you're working with today. Okay, with all of that, it's time for the final exam, but maybe not quite yet. Let's do a review really quickly before we jump into this final exam. Okay, so I mentioned we had 7 sessions, or this would be in the 7th session in the CICD summer school. So let's take a look back at, I mean, just the main ones where we actually covered some information. Because that first day of school, I just kind of like set the stage for what was to come, right? We talked about how it was going to be weekly. I gave like a preview of some of the topics that we were going to cover, which we did. And then we just kind of jumped into it in the following week. So no questions from the first day of school, because that was just kind of going through the syllabus, right? But we are going to review sessions 1 through 5 for this particular exam. So let's jump right into that. With starting off with 3 essential CI/CD facts. Okay, and the 3 essential CI/CD facts, we talked about CI, CD, and the bonus CD or CD1, CD2, and the benefits that they provide us as technologists, as automators. And CI being continuous integration, CD1 being continuous delivery, and CD2 being continuous deployment. And really the key takeaway from that one was automation, and how automation is key to getting the most out of these stages. Now, automation is not the end all be all of CI, CD, CD, right? You can have CI from your command line as you type in the commands. You can have triggers for your git pushes or git commits that run tests, that lint your code and do all these things as a manual, as I should say, as in response to a manual event. It doesn't have to be automatic. But if you're operating at scale, if you're working with teams, if you're, you want to take your development to the next level, you really, really need to tap into automation at every single one of these stages. And I will say it's really key for integration, because with integration, that's like your first foray into making sure your code is good. That's your opportunity to run tests automatically, to lint your code, to make sure you're following specific coding formats, to make sure you have your documentation in place if you're auto-generating documentation. So really tap into CI. And then delivery and deployment, that's going to vary, right? Depending on the type of software that you are developing. So that's kind of, it could be special cases no matter what. But definitely automation was the key that we discovered was automation we discovered was the key to all of these particular facets of our pipelines. So I'm going to show this comment from Tech Coach Ralph, and I'm going to take a sip of coffee real quick. And I will think I would. Okay, yeah, you're not setting me up locally. I appreciate that. But Tech Coach Ralph has been covering CI/CD and learning more about DevOps. He's been working with Playwright to run on a local Jenkins. I believe Playwright is a testing framework. I have not used it, but I've seen it. And working with Docker. And yeah, that's really cool stuff. I definitely have to agree with you on that. Yeah, I just love some of the tools that we have access to that are freely available, Docker being one of them, and then all of the open source tools that we could tap into as technologists and automators to just kind of play around. It makes it less like work when we have fun tools to work with. I'll say that. All right, going on to rethinking CI/CD tools. So, excuse me, pardon me for this tickle that I have in my throat. In session 2, which was the 3rd session, we talked about how we commonly call CI/CD tools, but if we follow the Unix philosophy that a tool is like super good, really focused on doing one thing and doing one thing well, that our tools aren't really tools, right? They're more like frameworks, because they provide us so much functionality that we can tap into either the base functionality, or we can extend them with plugins and extensions to make them do even more things. So the premise for that particular session was to look at some of the facets of these CI/CD tools, workflow management, scheduling, messaging, log analysis. Like I can go on and on. Excuse me. And then Jenkins being like the number one of extensions and plugins, how we can use these base functionalities, these kind of ingrained functionalities, and then make this tool or framework do even more through the use of plugins and additional software that we can add to the framework. So really, that was kind of the main topic there in session 2. And then in session 3, that's when we really got into a lot of CI/CD theory, talking about deployment methods at every scale. Specifically, we discussed the all at once deployment approach, rolling deployments, and the ever popular blue green deployment. And so, yeah, I went through some examples that really kind of showed the steps from git push all the way to deploy, and where we're taking some code, we're building it, testing it, and then pushing it out to our compute resources, and how these different deployments or these deployment methods differ in the way that they affect the compute resources, their benefits and risks, for deployment time, for rollback, which is very important if deployments go wrong. And I really enjoyed the graphics in that discussion. I really should have pulled some in for this particular review so that we could see some of those just one more time. But yeah, it was really cool talking about these different deployment methods and how we can use them for different types of deployments, right? One of the fallout, or one of the, not fallout, but additional topics that came to rise in that session, and people even asked for it by name, was the canary deployment, right? So we touched on it in session 3, but in session 4, we took a deeper dive into canary deployments. Specifically, we talked about the origin of the name. Miners used it to help them find issues early on as they, were spelunking in these dangerous places to get these precious minerals, or the resources that they were looking after. And so as we as software developers and technologists adopted that same sort of mindset to say, hey, let's start something small and sort of build up from there. And if anything happens, or we observe this deployment while it's still at the small scale, then we could fix it before we roll it out to everybody else. So it's like early detection for deployment. And that's kind of where the canary name came from. We also saw how canary deployment can be applied across all the other deployments that we discuss. Maybe not so much all at once, but definitely rolling deployments, blue-green deployments, and how we can use smaller subsets of compute, the endpoint in those particular deployment methods, and apply the canary method to observe, monitor, check for errors as we apply additional traffic to this smaller scale, this slice of our overall infrastructure, and then fix any problems there, roll back if we have to, and so on. So that was another really, really good discussion on canary deployments that we had. And last week, finally, we got into securing delivery and deployment pipelines, as we discussed earlier during the homework session, or homework review session. And really just looking at the ways that we can protect our CI/CD pipelines. We talked about securing secrets and credentials and making sure that they are indeed secret, that they are not committed to the repo, that they are limited in scope, that they are only applied to the environments that they're intended to be used in. What else? Securing artifacts, making sure our artifacts are secure and that the artifacts themselves don't contain credentials. And yeah, I'm trying to think of whatever else. Maybe I should review this. We'll see how I do on this final exam, right? But yeah, it was a good discussion on securing pipelines, and yeah, the two the two use cases that we discussed, those were key to showing how in the real world, people are just going about their daily business thinking that they're okay, and then they are affected or have the potential to be affected by bad actors. So a lot of good information came out of that discussion as well. All right. So with that review, let's jump into the final exam for real this time. Okay. So let's get started with this. So the way that's going to work, we're going to have some multiple choice questions and maybe a scenario or two. And so I'll display the question. It'll look a lot like this. The question will be to one side, answers A, B, C, D on the right side. If you're participating in real time, feel free to drop your answer into the comments and we can share and discuss. I'll display it for a little while and let you, kind of deliberate or think about it before you share your answer, and then I'll reveal the correct answer on the next slide, and we'll talk about it. So this question is like the gimme question. This is the question that is you get 100% for because you're here, you're breathing, and you're aware and observant of what's going on, right? So what's the name of the session that you're viewing right now? Is it A, SDLC Summer School, where SDLC is the software development lifecycle? Is it Automate Pipelines in June, July, and August, or B? That's the option for B. C, is it the DevOps summer session? Or D, is it CI/CD summer school? So I'm going to let that sit there for a second, let you think about it. I'm not going to wait too long on this one because I know it's an easy one. Yes, of course. This is CI/CD summer school. Okay, so that's kind of how the test is going to roll from here. I don't know how many questions I got, maybe 6 or 7. I pulled a few topics from each session. Yes, Alexandria, you were correct. It is D. Thank you so much for your answer. You're all set and ready to go for the exam. So let's just go ahead and jump right into this. I'm going to display the first question. Okay, from session 1, 3 essential CI/CD facts. What is the primary purpose of continuous integration, or CI, in a CI/CD pipeline? Is it A, to create container images for deployment? Is it B, to find and fix errors early in the development process? Is it C, to deploy software automatically without human intervention? Or is it D, to compress and bundle code into artifacts? Okay, if I had to look at these and do process of elimination, I would start with A and if we're creating container images for deployment, that sounds a lot like a delivery stage, right? So it's not integration. I'm going to jump down to D, and that also sounds like a delivery stage, right? Where we're compressing and bundling code into artifacts. Artifacts are what's left over after you run your delivery process. Maybe it's logs, maybe it's a container image, maybe it's a jar file, something like that. So that sounds a lot like delivery. Delivery is not integration. And then let's take a look at C. If you're deploying software automatically without human intervention, that sounds a lot like continuous deployment. It even has it in the name, deploy, right? So we know that that's not an integration step. So all that leaves us is B. We're finding and fixing errors early in the development process. And as I mentioned during the review, during the CI step of the CI/CD pipeline, that's when we can run automatic tests to test the software. We can check for credentials or tokens in our code that shouldn't be there. We can lint our code to make sure it's matches coding standards, and so on and so forth. So really, the CI stage is where we have the opportunity to catch a lot of things before we do our delivery process. And thank you, Alexandria, for your answer. Yes, you are correct. It is B. Awesome. Okay, let's go on to the next question. I think this is also from session 1. Yes, it is. Which of the following best describes continuous delivery in the CI/CD pipeline? Is it A, automating the deployment of code to production environments? B, integrating code changes in a shared repository multiple times a day? C, automatically creating an artifact that is ready to be deployed at any time? D, running tests to ensure code quality and compliance with standards. So we've got some information that we can use from the first question, where we really defined what CI is in CI/CD, And that sounds a lot like D, right? During the integration step, we're running tests, we're checking code quality, compliance with standards, and so on. So we can roll out number D or item D. Let's jump back up to A. We're automating the deployment of code to production environments. Deployment, again, is in the question. Deployment isn't really delivery. Deployment is we're actually taking an artifact and putting it in place in the environment where it's intended to run. So that's not delivery. So we can eliminate that one. And we can look at B. B is integrating code changes regularly. And that's what, if you're working on a development team, that's what you would expect your team to do, work locally in their own environments and then contribute their code to a repository where the code can be mixed or integrated with other code. And that's where we run our tests and so on and so forth. So it's also right there in the context of this answer, integrating. So that's not necessarily a delivery process, which leaves us with, and Alexandra, you nailed it again, C, automatically creating an artifact that's ready to be deployed at any time. And that's another benefit of having this automation in place, right? Because if we have a delivery pipeline, then we're ready to deploy changes, could be at a moment's notice. The product team could come to us and say, hey, users are finding bugs in the code. We need a fix. And you say, I got you. Not a problem. Let me push the fix. Bam. Pipeline kicks off. We got a new version. It's ready to be deployed. Click the next button or approve this deployment. And bam, that artifact is deployed and it's in production in no time. And that's one of the benefits that we get from having these artifacts that are ready to be deployed. All right, let's move on to the next question, which I didn't highlight the answer. Yes, and just so it's official, Alexandria, yes, again, you're correct. Okay, let's go on to the next question, which is still from session 1. In continuous deployment, what determines if software is deployed automatically? Is it A, the success or failure of automated tests? B, the presence of a Docker file in the code base? C, the size of the artifact? Or D, the type of binary being deployed? Okay, I'm going to let you read that for a second and consider these answers. And now just again going through process elimination. Size of an artifact, we're not going to automatically deploy if an artifact is smaller or bigger than it used to be. So I'm just going to quickly eliminate that one right away. Type of binary being deployed, we could almost consider this in some cases, right? Maybe. But I don't think we can automatically deploy if we say we get a jar file or a container image or an exe or I don't know, a Python package, npm module, whatever the case is. Just because it's a particular type of binary doesn't necessarily mean that we can deploy it automatically. If we look at B, just because we have a Docker file, oh, okay, we got a Docker file in the repo, boom, deploy that thing automatically. It's running. No, that's kind of counterfeit as well, right? Because we can have all kinds of projects that have Docker files in the code base that they might not even be deployed, right? What if it's just a test suite that uses a Docker file to build a test environment, run the test, and then it spins down? We're not deploying that test, right? So we can eliminate that one as well, which leaves us with, and Alexandria, you're batting 100. A, the success or failure of automated tests, right? When we talk about continuous deployment, a true continuous deployment environment, humans don't even touch the deployment. Maybe, well, in some cases, you might want to kick it off, right? You want to have permission before you kick it off. But that's not really continuous deployment. That's more like an automated deployment. But in a truly continuous deployment environment, a continuous deployment pipeline, that pipeline is going to go as soon as that artifact is ready. Bam, it's gone. And it does this based on the success or failure of automated tests. There may be some other triggers that are involved, but more than likely the artifact is built, it's delivered, it's put into place, an environment is spun up, tests are run on that artifact. And if those tests pass, that artifact is good, it's going into production. Simple as that. So that's a truly automated and hands off, no humans involved, continuous deployment environment. Okay, let's go on to the next question. We're finally out of session one. We made it. Session two, where we talked about CI/CD tools as frameworks. Okay, the question: when considering CI/CD tools as frameworks, what is the significance of plugins and extensions? Okay, A, they're used to minimize pipeline runtimes. B, they allow CI/CD framework to perform basic tasks. C, they extend the base functionality of CI/CD frameworks, allowing for additional capabilities. Or D, they replace the need for workflow management in CI/CD frameworks. Let's work this top to bottom ish, right? um, I suppose if we had a plugin that did something really, really fancy, maybe it could minimize our pipeline runtime, right? But I don't think that's the end all be all of using plugins and extensions, right? Plugins and extensions, they kind of bundle software that we can apply to our CI/CD framework and use it in some specific way. And sometimes that might make our pipeline run faster, but that's not their base functionality, right? Speaking of base functionality, so we're going to eliminate A, go on to B. Plugins and extensions allow us, the CI/CD framework, to perform basic tasks. If they're already performing the basic task of whatever we need from this framework, then the plugin or extension really doesn't do anything more than the pipeline, pardon me, was allowed or already intended to do, right? So I'm going to eliminate B. I'm going to jump down to D. And we need workflow management in our CI/CD frameworks, right? That's kind of the whole point of having this framework, this tool, to manage our workflows, our pipelines, whatever the process that we're trying to automate. We need that as a base functionality in our pipelines, right? So I'm going to eliminate D, which leaves us with C. Yes, they extend the base functionality of CI/CD frameworks, and they give us some extra stuff, right? For example, Jenkins has a lot of capabilities for interacting with cloud platforms, or reaching out to other systems for its deployments or for running tests. That's not a base feature of functionality of the Jenkins software, the Jenkins platform, right? But we can use plugins and extensions to actually make that happen. Sending email is also not a base feature of the Jenkins platform. But guess what? There's a plugin that allows you to send email or other types of messages from Jenkins. So these plugins and extensions, they give us they give us a power up. I'll say that, so that we can do more with the frameworks, in addition to the base features that they provide us. Awesome. Let's go on to the next question from session 3. We're flying through this thing now, right? Deployment methods at every scale. What is one of the main advantages of the blue-green deployment method? A, it's the fastest deployment method overall. B, it minimizes downtime by allowing quick rollback to the previous version if issues are detected. C, it's the cheapest deployment methods in terms of infrastructure costs. Or D, it allows for partial deployment to selected nodes before scaling out. Okay, starting from top to bottom, and maybe jumping around a little bit as we do. I think I'm going to eliminate this one, because the fastest deployment method overall is that all at once, right? You press the button, you say deploy, and everything is updated immediately. I mean, that deployment process might take some time, but you don't have to wait for some factor of n, where n is the number of compute instances that you're deploying to, right? So it's, deployment scale or deployment speed is 1, right? You press the deploy button, and it's going to everything. So I would say all at once is the fastest, which means blue green isn't the fastest. Let's jump down to D. Uh, D, partial deployment, sounds a lot like the canary deployment approach, right? Where we deploy to maybe one node, or maybe even a rolling deployment where we're deploying to like not the entire stack all at once, but we're deploying to just a specific piece of our compute infrastructure or our clusters. So I'm going to roll that one out as well. So let's take a look at C. Is the cheapest deployment. If we're talking about cost in terms of deployment methods, blue green is actually probably the most expensive, right? Because we have to have a duplicate copy of whatever our infrastructure looks like. If we're doing a blue green with 2 servers, or with, I should say, if our application is running on 1 server, blue green, guess what? We got 2 servers. If we have a cluster of 50 servers and we're doing some type of blue green, more than likely we're going to have another cluster of maybe up to 50 servers. It could be smaller, depending on the scenario, but it's not cheap because you're duplicating infrastructure. Whatever the cost is, your blue green deployment is going to have some factor almost greater than or equal to the n, where n is the number of compute instances, for the cluster running the application. So it's not cheap. However, if we take a look at B, it does minimize downtime by allowing quick rollback. Because with blue green, we have 2 copies of the compute, right? We have one copy over here. If this is the blue copy, is running the current version. And then we have the green copy, it's running the new version. And if this green version is bad, we can take this one down and roll back to the B. Simple as that. If we do all at once, it's a little bit harder because we have to do another deployment to roll back. If it's a rolling deployment, we could be in the process of rolling and discover our error, and then we have to probably deploy again with a new version, or with the old version, to roll through everything again. And that's going to put our application in a funky state. Also may take some crazy amount of time to get that done. But in blue green, we just we update the way that the traffic is routed, and we're cut back over, we're rolled back in a very short period of time. So B is the correct answer for this one. All right, let's go to session 4, where we took a closer look at canary deployments. Pardon me, y'all. I'm just got everything going on today. Why is the term canary used to describe canary deployments? A, it's a nickname for the color scheme used in yellow-green deployments. B, it's an acronym for Continuous Automated Network Evaluation of Releases, or CANARY. C, it represents the quick deployment speed of this method. Or D, it's named after a bird that miners use for early detection of issues. We can eliminate these probably pretty quickly, right? So if we look at A, I don't think we discussed a yellow-green deployment. If we talked about colors in our deployment, more than likely we talked about blue-green deployments, right? I like the creativity in this answer, but no, yellow-green, as far as I know, and as far as the information that we discussed in this session, it's not a thing, right? We did not discuss the continuous automated network evaluation for release process or method or pipeline or whatever this is, with the acronym CANARY. I like that one though. That's pretty cool. Maybe that's something that we could come up with collectively and start saying, oh, we're using CANARY approach. Yeah, it's the continuous automated network evaluation for releases. Yep. C, moving on, it represents the quick deployment speed of this method. I guess canaries fly, maybe they fly fast. We did not really talk about the speed of a canary deployment in terms of getting through all of the compute resources, getting everything deployed out. And actually, if you think about it, canary deployments can be kind of slow, right? Because in a canary method, you have to gradually ratchet up the traffic that is being deployed. Like as you expand, as you're either expanding your deployment to more compute resources or increasing the traffic that is being received by those compute resources, specifically talking about web applications. then it could be pretty slow, right? Because as we go from, say, 10% traffic all the way up to 100% traffic, depending on those increments that we use to go from 10 to 100, um, if we sit at, 10% for a day or even 15 minutes, and we, go all the way up to 90, increasing the traffic, that could take some time, right? So I wouldn't call speed a, a good way to evaluate, or, to say this is why we call it a canary deployment. Which leaves us with D, the actual answer. Yes. It describes the type of bird used by miners for early detection of issues. The miners, they would put this canary in a cage. They would take the canary down with them in the mine. If the canary, because animal senses are greater than our human senses in a lot of cases, if that canary said, "Hey, something is not right here," it would start to flap, it would start to chirp, it would go crazy, right? And so the miners would say, "We don't know exactly what's going on right now, but we need to get up out of here," right? So we use that same approach in software by starting small, small being this, the size of a canary, for whatever case is, and just slowly starting there, checking everything out, making sure everything is good. And then we increase the traffic or increase the scale of our deployment from there, as long as everything is good. So yes, the answer for this question is D. All right, let's move on to the next one. Session 5, securing delivery and deployment pipelines. Which of the following is a best practice for managing credentials in CI/CD pipelines? A, hard code credentials directly in all files used for configuration and deployments. B, use a single admin credential for all environments. C, limit access to credentials that are short-lived credentials when possible. Or D, store credentials in publicly accessible files, or a publicly accessible file for easy access by all members of the development team. Wow. Okay, let's take a look at these. A, we're not going to hard code credentials into our configuration files, right? I mean, I've seen it happen before. That's not a good approach for keeping our credentials safe, for managing our credentials. Let's not hard code. Let's jump down to D. That is even worse, right? If we make our credentials publicly accessible so that all of our development team can access them. Now, I know that getting permission, like probably one of the hardest parts of a job that I've had in many of my different, companies that I've worked with, is just getting access to stuff, right? So a lot of times people will circumvent the access by just sharing credentials, making them publicly available, not even publicly available, making them more available in a Google Doc or something like that. And that's not a good practice. It's easy because it lets you get your job done, but it's not a good practice in the long term because it's insecure. So if you're making it publicly accessible, if the world can read it, yeah, that's not a good case. So we're going to eliminate D. Let's jump back up to B. It's not. I mean, in some cases, I know, and I've seen this happen. I'm guilty of it myself, where I have one credential. It might just be the admin credential for a cloud account, and I'm using that for everything. Right? That's not a good practice. So we're going to eliminate B because we should have specific credentials for every environment that we're deploying to, which leaves us with the correct answer, C. We're limiting access to credentials that are short-lived when possible. So let's reflect on this one a little bit. Number one, we're limiting access. We're not letting everybody see these credentials, only people that have a need to access their credentials. Then on top of that, the credentials are short-lived, meaning they can only be used for a certain period of time. Maybe it's just for that deployment. Maybe it's for an hour. So if we have to do multiple deployments, in a span of time, we can use those credentials then. But they're short-lived. So if somebody catches those credentials while we're deploying them, then hopefully, the risk is mitigated by not allowing access beyond this window of time that we have set for the credential. But even in that GitHub Actions example, if you read that that paper from Palo Alto Networks where they captured the GitHub token, I mean, they were sitting there waiting on this workflow to run. When it ran, they caught that token and they were busy. They were getting to work, right? So even then, the short-lived credentials, it's a best practice, but it's not the end all be all of keeping our pipelines secure. We got to be more vigilant and more careful than even using that approach. But nonetheless, that's the answer for this particular question. Let's go on to the next question, which is a scenario question. This is it's the first, and I believe it's the only one because we're reaching the end of this particular session, where we have a scenario that we need to consider. It's not A or B. We're going to discuss it and see what some of the best answers are. Consider this like the essay question for this final exam, right? So let's get into it. Your team has implemented a CI/CD pipeline to automate the deployment of its web applications to a cloud platform. During a security audit, you discover that access credentials have been committed to the application code. Oh my God. On further investigation, you notice that the credentials allow the pipeline to run with admin privileges for deployments to multiple environments, including development, staging, and production. Okay, so basically you come across this pipeline and it's all bad, right? So let's take a look at what the next part of this question is. Okay, hard-coded credentials. How would you handle the hard-coded credentials? What steps would you take to prevent the team from checking in credentials in the future? And environment privileges. How would you manage permissions used by the pipeline to minimize security risks when deploying to different environments? Okay, let's just pause. Let's take a beat on this one, right? Because there's a lot going on. We've found some pretty, egregious, some pretty glaring problems with this particular pipeline. And we, as the CI/CD experts on the team, the CI/CD practitioners that have taken CI/CD summer school and retain this information, we're being asked to resolve or help fix the problems with this pipeline, right? Okay, let's jump into it. If you have some thoughts on this particular scenario, please share them in the event chat. I'll stand by for your answers as I consider some of the ways that I think I would start resolving these problems. The first one, how would you handle the hard-coded credentials? One thing that I would want to do is just nuke this repo from orbit, right? I would just want to start from scratch and just like say, hey, we got to get rid of that old repo because it's got credentials in it. And I don't even want to deal with the fact that this repo has credentials in it anymore. So I would probably, number one, just get rid of that repo. It's gone. Actually, you know what? Even before I do that, that's just like the, I don't know, the impulse that I would have to just start to clean things up. But we need to stop the bleeding first, right? If these credentials have been hard-coded in this code and they've been exposed and people have gotten them, then we need to make sure that they can't be used, right? So whatever method that is allowed to me, I would want to make sure these credentials are turned off, right? Deleted. So for example, if the platform was AWS, if they were secret key and the secret key ID, I would go into the AIM console and I would find the place where these keys were deployed and just nix them, get rid of them. Credentials are gone. They're no good. So if anybody has them, they can't use them anymore, right? Which also means that our pipeline is not going to run. So we got to fix that down the road. Then I would delete this repo, right? Out of the gate. I'm just getting rid of this repo and starting from scratch. So that's how I'm handling the credentials. And then the steps that I would take to prevent this from happening in the future. Number one, I would get the team to start using some pre-commit checks to scan their code for credentials. I would run those same scans in the CI step so that we're scanning the repository for credentials as well. If we're using GitHub Actions, for example, there are actions that would allow me to do that. So I would want to make sure that, we're number one, as much as we possibly can, let's not get any credentials in there in the first place, right? Let's make sure that they are stored inside the repo using secrets and that they're not committed to code. We can do that with tools on our local system. And we can also do that with tools in our pipelines themselves, just to make sure that everything is good. Okay, so we're clean. Our credentials are secure. We've created new credentials for the privileges. Let's move over to that one. For that one, I would start by creating credentials for the different environments that are being deployed to. Now, on the one hand, if you're dealing with a lot of applications, a lot of environments, this can cause credential sprawl, right? And that's why people just make that one admin credential that kind of handles everything. But then if people get that credential, they got the keys to the kingdom, right? So as much as it comes with an overhead of management, it also comes with a better stance of security if you have credentials that are very specific to their use. So in this case, I would create, depending on the number of environments. If it was just like, I think in the question before the setup, if I go back one slide, it said development, staging, and production. So just to kind of kick things off, I might not say, here's a development credential, here's a staging credential, here's a production credential. I might just say, here's a production credential, and here's a non-production credential. So then the non-production credentials could be used across the staging and development environments. However, best practice would be to have development credentials, staging credentials, and production credentials, not only for security, but also for minimizing blast radius, right? Because what if you allow these credentials to do something? I mean, it's not necessarily crazy. Maybe it's par for the course. Maybe you're deleting an instance, right? And so you're using these credentials, you're running a pipeline, says, hey, turn off this server or delete this server. And you accidentally run that pipeline with those credentials in the production environment, and you're deleting production servers when you intended to delete development servers or something like that. So using specific permissions also helps minimize your blast radius in an operational stance along with your security stance. So I would definitely break those permission or break those credentials out for the environments that they are intended to. And I think that brings us to the end of the exam. We did get a response here. Tech Coach Ralph says he'd use AWS Secrets or GitHub Secrets or whichever CI/CD software you're using. Indeed. And that's one of the core features of some of these applications, right? In GitHub Actions, we have secrets that we can add to the repository. We can have secrets that we can store at the organization level that we can share across repositories for like non-production environments, production environments, or whatever the use case might be. In AWS, I like using AWS parameter store for environments. So that way, if I like on the GitHub side, I could just say, hey, this deployment is intended to go to staging. And then that staging can be used to map to the credentials in AWS. The pipeline just had the permission to read those credentials, pull those credentials down as needed, and then use them to do whatever it needs to do. Push an image to Elastic Container Registry, kick off a deployment in Elastic Container Service, or so on and so forth with whatever the case it is. So yeah, we have the means, we have the tools to protect our credentials. We just have to have the sense to use them, right? So definitely thanks for that tip, Tech Coach Ralph. Okay, I believe that brings us to the end. I just want to say, I'm gonna give you this. Congratulations, you made it through the final exam. All the answers that we got with the help from Alexandria, from Tech Coach Ralph, we were able to pass this exam with flying colors. 10 out of 10, 100. We aced it. And we all passed, right? We're all leveling up. So congratulations to you for finishing this exam and also for sticking with me to the end of this summer session of CI/CD Summer School. Excellent. Congrats to you. My hat's off to you indeed. Okay, which brings us to the end of the slides. That's my bumper there to let me know that I've reached the end of the deck. And as I go into my my banners here to wrap up, I just want to say thanks for joining me. Whether this is your first session or you've been with me from session 0, because all good computer engineers start counting from 0, right? Yeah, I just want to say thanks, man. This was my first foray into live streaming. And because usually, I mean, if you know me, if you follow me, then you know that I produce content that is it's scripted. It is very heavily edited. I make a lot of mistakes, but the folks that I work with, the editors, the producers, the artists, they make it look like super clean when it's finally published, right? So this is my first foray in a more loose format where, hey, you're going to get to see all the mistakes I made. You're going to hear me cough and sneeze or whatever the case is. No edits here, right? We're going live to tape, as I like to call it. So thank you for joining me in this particular exercise to share my my interest, my expertise, and my passion in CI/CD. So yeah, and thanks for people who joined me from all across the US, all around the world. We had people from Minneapolis, Minnesota. We had people from Nigeria. We had people from Ghana. We had people from the UK joining us. We had people from Orange County, which is right down the road from me. Thank you all for joining me for CI/CD Summer School. I really, really do appreciate it. So what's next for CI/CD Summer School? Well, it's not summer, or we're reaching the end of summer, right, in the United States, where I am broadcasting from. So we're going to wrap up CI/CD Summer School. We're going to put it on ice for the fall and winter. But next spring 2025, look out for announcements for CI/CD Summer School 2025. Get ready for another session where we're going to dive deep into CI/CD topics and just share with each other, breaking news. We're going to do around the way and everything, and, get some of these tools that we can use. And we're just going to sharpen the steel of our expertise as automators, as technologists, and as CI/CD practitioners. However, in the meantime, I will be coming back to do live streams on occasion over the in-between times. Specifically, and I don't know when I'll schedule this, but you'll see another announcement in my feed for the lessons learned. It's like CI/CD Summer School lessons learned, right? And really, that's for me, but I hope that you'll join me then as well, right? Because in that particular session, I've been taking notes and kind of reflecting on my experience with live streaming, and I want to have that information for my next foray into live streaming on a regular basis. And so even if it's just for me to watch my own session to say, hey, this is past me talking to future me. This is what I did, and this is what happened, good or bad. And this is what I changed, and this is why I'm doing this now, or this is why I encourage you to do this, and so on and so forth. So it's mostly for me. But if you ever have the opportunity, or you want to think about live streaming, then I hope that you can take advantage of that too. So really, CI/CD Summer School lessons learned will be like one big around the way episode, right? Of me talking about the tools that I used, the techniques that I learned, the mistakes that I made, and how to work around them, and that type of thing. So I'm looking forward to sharing that information with you as well in the next couple of months. I can't pinpoint an exact time, but it'll be coming soon, right? And then also, I hope you'll be able to join me at the Blacks in Technology Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. It's coming up next week. If you're watching this during the week of, August, it's the last week of August. So we're going into the first week of September. If I see you at BitCon, holler at me, shout me out. And also, I'll be going back into developing courses for LinkedIn Learning and other online course providers. So I'm kind of excited about that as well. So with that, again, as we wrap up this session of CI/CD Summer School, I just want to say thank you for joining me. We got one comment from Tech Coach Ralph. And you know what, Tech Coach Ralph, I appreciate your feedback, sir. You are also a member of the Blacks in Technology community, and I also follow your live stream on YouTube. And I don't know how you do it, man. You produce so much content that is beneficial to your audience that I can only aspire to one day get to your level when it comes to live streaming. So thank you, sir, for joining us today. Thanks for the feedback. And I really, really do appreciate it. I'm taking that to heart. So with that, y'all, man, I just want to say thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time right here on LinkedIn Learning, YouTube Live, wherever you're watching this live or in the replay. I'll see you soon. Take care.